Many of us will have a few or maybe a lot of negative limiting beliefs, things we're telling ourselves that we can't do, we can't have, we can't achieve. Maybe we can have a little bit, but no more than that. We put this low ceiling on our potential, on our capability, on our capacity. And we're telling ourselves, we can have up to here, but no more. And then we believe these things, they're negative limiting beliefs. We believe them. And whatever we believe, that becomes our reality. If we believe we can't, then we can't. And if we believe that we can, then we can. So here's the interesting thing. Here's how they tend to be formed in the first place. At some point in your life, often it's way back in the past before your view of the world was even properly formed. Maybe you were quite young because memories and beliefs have no knowledge of age, right? So at some point, recently or back in the past, something happens that you believe to be true. You heard something, you thought something, someone said something, you believe it to be true, and you store that as a memory. Intellectually, you hear it. You store it as a memory. That memory has a feeling with it. That feeling's not good. And every time you have occasion to think that thing again, you fetch that same feeling again, that same belief again. It doesn't feel good. And when you put that memory back, you put some of that emotion on it. And every time you have occasion to think that same thing, you feel that same feeling, it fetches that same belief. Before you put it back, you put some of that emotion on it and you put it back. And over time, every time you fetch that memory, that belief, you're feeling something negative, you put it on there, it gets worse and worse over time. So it can be that at some point, something small and innocent becomes absolutely massive, present, and debilitating. So here's the easy thing that you can do about that. And, I used to have this thing about I'm not worth it. I'm not good enough. And what I used to do, how it showed up for me, is I'd call myself a bloody idiot. Every time I thought I'd screwed up, or every time I did screw up, I'd think to myself, okay, you bloody idiot. I'd feel like a bloody idiot, and it would fetch that I'm not worth it memory. And I'd put more and more and more on that over time. And it happened when I was very young. It probably started. And over time, it gradually became a thing where, every time I screwed up, I'd feel it. So what I started to do is when I'd say to myself, you bloody idiot, when I'd feel the bloody idiot, when I'd trigger that belief of I'm not worth it, I'd imagine that I felt different. I'd imagine something different. And the way I did it for me is I'd imagine to myself that I was speaking to a large audience at a corporate event, and I was standing at the podium and I was saying to myself, or to the audience, this is a solution finding opportunity. And every time I'd screw up and I'd feel myself saying, you bloody idiot, and I'd feel like that, I'd do this other thing. I'd say to myself, this is a solution finding opportunity. And because it was unnatural, because it was silly, because it felt different, every time I was triggered, every time I held that I'm not worth a thing, I would feel different, and feeling different would dust a little bit off and put it back. And every time I found myself triggered, I would do this thing, this silly thing of this is a solution finding opportunity. I'd feel different. I'd peel a little bit off and I'd put it back. And within weeks, I'd been triggered so many times and I'd peeled so much of that off that that limiting thing just absolutely disappeared. And it can be anything. The trick is to, when you're thinking something and you're feeling something and it triggers whatever that belief is that you have, while you're triggered, find a way to imagine a different feeling. Just imagine. That's all. This part of your brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. Intellectually, you would argue, but emotionally, you're allowed to imagine anything you like. So if you imagine something, the feelings will follow. So while you're triggered, you imagine that it feels different, you dust a little bit off and you put it back. And every time you do that, you're diluting your limiting belief. And very soon, that same thing happens, the same feeling comes, the same memory gets fetched, and there's just no emotion on that. And that's the day you realize that you've licked your limiting belief. So I'm Jake from Stressed Executive, helping people resolve and dissolve their limiting beliefs and resolving the stress to unwind the mind.